What's going on, YouTube? It's Ashcon, aka Dropped Out Beats, here again with another Addiction Neuroscientist Reacts video. For those who are new tuning into the channel, my name's Ashcon, aka Dropped Out Beats. Like I said, I'm a trained addiction neuroscientist and hip-hop producer, and this video series is where I react to various musicians discussing their experience with drug use, whether it be firsthand, secondhand, doesn't matter. We're talking about drugs. The point of this series is to clear up any bad drug information that I might hear. Not that this video that we're about to watch is bad drug information. And to reinforce any good information that I hear. Today we are looking at someone that inspired me to continue working on this channel. And that is a fellow producer by the name of Weaver Beats. Now, I think the only issue with Weaver Beats is that he spells his name with an S and I spell mine with a Z. So clearly, that's a big distinction between us. I mean, the Beats with an S and the Beats with a Z. Mine's all one word. His is two words. No, I'm just playing around. Definitely go check out Weaver Beats. He's a funny guy, and this video is not funny. This video is where Weaver Beats talks about how quitting smoking weed changed his life for the better. I'm not even going to waste y'all's time. Let's get straight into it. Take my big head off the screen, transition to where we can see Weaver's beautiful face, and let's hear what Weaver has to say about how quitting weed helped him.
What is going on today, guys? Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to be talking about weed. I used to smoke weed for 15-ish years. I actually quit 2 years ago, and I'm going to tell you about how it improved my life. This is going to be, I think I'm going to post this on the main channel, so this is going to be a little bit different than usual. This video is not really going to be too funny, I don't think. So if you're looking for humor, probably look elsewhere, maybe watch a different video of mine. But yes, if you didn't know this, I used to be a big weed head. Now, there's nothing wrong with smoking weed. In fact, if you like it, smoke it. There's nothing wrong with it. The problem is definitely when people do it too much, and I was one of those people who would do it way too much.
So this is a good part to pause because Weaver Beats is getting at something that is the point of this channel. There is a reasonable amount of substance that you might be able to use, assuming that, all things are good in your life, right? And so what Weaver specifically says is, hey, I stopped smoking about 2 years ago, but you don't have to stop smoking if it's not affecting your life in a negative way and you're not doing it too much, right? I think that's a completely reasonable stance to have, and the point of this series is that is the reasonable stance to have just about every drug. So I appreciate Weaver for starting it off like that. I think so many people, and we'll look at, people I'm sure down the line that demonize other drug users once they stop, right? So good job on Weaver Beats for not being judgmental of other people who still smoke weed.
It's not really a harmful drug. I would argue for that point. But like with anything, you can indulge in it too much, and I was one of these people who would indulge in it far too much. Quitting is not for everyone. For me, though, it was the right choice. And ironically, today is the 2-year anniversary of me quitting. People are probably like, wow, you quit on 421? What the hell happened on 420?
Yeah, what the hell, man?
It really doesn't have much to do with it. When Weaver was a young 16-year-old boy, he decided to try marijuana. I tried it with my friends one time, didn't really feel it the first time. The second time, though, I smoked it by myself with like a little foil pipe. I promise I was not doing anything else. I just tried weed, but I didn't have a pipe, so I used like a foil pipe or some. The second time I had done it, it was crazy to me. I basically had smoked it, didn't really feel anything.
So probably should have paused just a little bit earlier, but this is also something that I would like to start talking about in this series, is at what age do people that develop a substance use disorder or drug addiction, at what age do they start using drugs? This is especially important to me because during my PhD training, I was specifically interested in development developmental neuroscience of alcohol use disorder and how using alcohol at early ages specifically predisposed you to developing an alcohol use disorder. So the earlier you use a drug, the more likely you are to be addicted to that drug. It's just a simple fact of drug addiction and the developmental trajectories of developing a substance use disorder. So drop a comment down below. What age did you start using drugs? If you feel comfortable, you don't have to, you know what I'm saying? But if you got a story to tell, I would love to hear it down in the comments about how, you know, like Weaver's saying, if he started at 15, 16, maybe he's more likely to develop a substance use disorder, in this case, cannabis use disorder, than somebody who started smoking at 21. Somebody who started smoking at 21 is definitely significantly less likely to develop a cannabis use disorder than somebody who started at 16. The same is true for alcohol, cocaine, opioids, meth, whatever drug you want to, insert your drug here. The earlier you use it, the more likely you are to become addicted to that substance. Let's get back into it.
Only thing, went to take the trash out, came back. I was skating on my skateboard. I ollied up the curb, and then boom, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. I was like, oh my God, what is life? Suddenly I was having philosophical thoughts that I had never had in my life. I was a very linear NPC sort of person, just thinking about my day-to-day activities, not really pondering about what is going on in the world or how big the world is, anything like that. And it was kind of a life-changing moment for me. So it kind of influenced me to keep doing it. And I would smoke weed with my friends here and there throughout high school. It wasn't really that much of a habit at that point.
Yeah, so I think this is a decent point to pause on, because he's kind of just noting that at first it wasn't too big of a deal that he wasn't using it constantly. It wasn't affecting his life negatively. And then also I wanted to get at the conscious experience that Weaver's talking about there, where he started having, philosophical thoughts that he had never had before. That's pretty common of psychedelic drugs in general. And while weed is not necessarily a psychedelic, I think weed is very similar to the psychedelics, and it kind of prompts some of those thought patterns, those philosophical, what is reality, type thought patterns. It should be noted that cannabis is probably more addictive than psychedelics. The likelihood that you develop a psychedelic drug addiction is very low, but let's get back into the video.
Like, it was kind of just like, we do it a few times a day or whatever. Anyways, I continued through college.
He said a few times a day, and maybe he meant a few times a week, because a few times a week maybe would be less, wouldn't meet the criteria of something like cannabis use disorder strictly, whereas a few times a day would meet the criteria for cannabis use disorder. So if he meant a few times a week, that's different than a few times a day. A few times a day would indicate a problem. A few times a week would indicate, possible problem, but we seem to be okay.
College, smoking weed. I picked up music when I was about 20 or so. I mean, I was already doing music. Like, I was into playing guitar and stuff like that, but I picked up music production when I was about 20. I was smoking weed, and for me, it was like an inspirational thing. Like, I was like, oh man, you smoke weed and you're like, I want to make music. I'm inspired. I feel inspired right now. And I guess for me, it continued to become a habit further and further, because I felt like I needed it to be inspired. I needed it to want to make music. I needed it to enjoy it. And it kind of took me to the point eventually down the road, I'm going to skip ahead here, where I would be, grabbing like a half ounce a week, which is, I mean, I live in Hawaii, so it's a bit more expensive than it would be in California or whatever. I mean, the prices varied throughout the years. So I would buy weed. I would smoke maybe 10 to 15 times a day throughout the day.
The smart riding system made for BMW Motorrad.
It was like a wake and bake, after lunch, blah, blah, blah. It would just a bit more expensive than it would be in California or whatever. I mean, the prices varied throughout the years. So I would buy weed. I would smoke maybe like 10 to 15 times a day throughout the day. Like it was like a wake and bake, after lunch, blah, blah, blah. Like it would just continue. It was a continuous thing. I would smoke it like it was somebody addicted to cigarettes. Now, some people can function totally fine like this, but for me, like I was completely safe. I wasn't taking risks. I wasn't, going outside my comfort zone. I was really just living my life the same way every single day, smoking weed. Now, there's nothing wrong with that in particular, but for me, it was actually holding me back. And I didn't really make this change until 2 years ago. I had thought about it for a really long time. I was like, I really think this is holding me back. Like maybe if I could quit weed, I could be better. I could become better. Anyways,
I think that's a great point to pause on, because he's noting that after 15 years of smoking, he's just now coming to the realization that, oh man, maybe this is the thing that's holding me back. And I think a lot of people from the outside see someone in some type of substance use disorder and think, it should be obvious. Like, isn't it obvious that you're smoking or you're drinking or your XYZ drug use here is the thing that is preventing you from, achieving what you want to achieve? But at the same time, that's convoluted by the person, in this case, Weaver Beats. I hate to pause on this face for him here. My bad, Weaver. But, at first he's saying how much it inspired him. So it was a very inspirational experience that then led him to do other things. He didn't specify those things, but from what he specifically said, it was inspiring, right? But I think what we're hearing is that inspiration wore off. And so if you're doing a drug like that all the time and you have oriented your life around the drug, right, then you're not going to be able to break out of that cycle of substance use disorder. And so he's playing it safe so that he always knows, I have weed, and, weed isn't always going to be a thing that, makes you a homeless person necessarily, because society is more accepting of weed. That is probably another topic for a different day on how society treats different drug users. But I think one of the primary reasons that, people with alcohol use disorder, cannabis use disorder are better off is because society is nicer to them as opposed to somebody who is using heroin or meth or crack. And so, yeah, just something to keep in mind, that at first the drug was inspiring, but then he definitely started to realize it was holding him back, and he was in control of his thinking to say, hey, I think I want to stop.
Skip ahead to about 2 years ago now. I kept getting strep throat, and I think it was this is kind of gross. I kept getting it from a bong, because I would smoke out of a bong. A bong is the best way to smoke weed if you're going to smoke it. Either, obviously if you're not doing extracts or whatever. If you're smoking flower, the best way to do it is with a bong. I'm sure not everyone will agree with that. So anyway.
That's because your bong has stagnant water in it and breeds bacteria. So please clean your bongs, people, and you won't get strep throat.
I would smoke out of a bong like 15 times a day. And I wasn't useless because I was still motivated. I was doing music at the time. Obviously 2 years ago, I had picked up YouTube at that point. But I was always like, my delivery was not as good on camera. I don't know if you go to my videos that are over 2 years old, but you'll notice my delivery is not as good on camera. Also, I was not as funny. It made me more camera shy. It made me less willing to take risks with topics because I didn't want to offend anyone. I didn't want to step on anyone's toes, which is pretty ironic now looking at what I do now. If you actually look at it, my channel started to get a lot more attention once I quit smoking weed. And I do not believe that is a coincidence. I'm gonna pull up the analytics here.
To Weaver's credit, I definitely didn't watch him when he was smoking weed, or at least I don't remember watching him when he was smoking weed. YouTube probably showed me him year and a half, 2 years ago, something like that.
I was getting maybe 1,200 views a day, and I was uploading almost every day at this point. Suddenly, though, I started to get some traction. Now, that's because it was a change in personality. My personality changed. for the better, in my opinion. I think when I smoked weed, I was a lot more boring. I wasn't as funny. I'm not the smartest person in the world, but I definitely wasn't as intelligent. It wasn't as witty. Yeah, that change actually benefited me a lot, as you can see here. Now, like I said, quitting weed is not for everyone. Some people, like, they don't overdo it the way I was overdoing it. It doesn't affect their life in any way. I know people give lots of examples. They're like, oh, Snoop Dogg smokes weed all the time. He's fine. If you're in the position where it's not affecting you at all, you can smoke weed all the time. And, there's different personalities, different types of people. Not everyone's affected by it the same way. For me, though, it affected me negatively. It can hold you back from being the person you want to be.
So yeah, I want to just pause right here to note that, Weaver's a pretty fair, what's the word? When he is weighing the utility of cannabis in today's society, he seems to be pretty fair about it, right? It's not for him anymore. It used to be for him. It's not for him anymore. It may be for you, but he's telling his story so that if you relate to it, you can start to see the signs, right? And that's what we appreciate and applaud here. That's noble, that's double applaud that. Good job, Weaver. But I think marijuana and all drugs, we have a very poor understanding of drugs because we don't understand how they work and the utility of them. And so maybe for Weaver, smoking weed all the time was a hindrance, but it may be the case that smoking weed all the time for someone else is medicine. We can see this in, various chronic pain patients. There's a big thing going on right now with chronic pain and whether or not they should be continued to be prescribed opioids, because to some extent they have such a tolerance that opioids doesn't take their pain away, but at the same time it helps them enough to function on a daily basis. And so who am I to tell you what drug to take to function at your best? But that is the key point. What drug is either allowing you or hindering you from becoming your best? In the case of ADHD, those individuals highly benefit from an amphetamine or a methylphenidate prescription, right? It's one of the most efficacious drugs we've ever seen in clinical trials is ADHD medication and amphetamines and methylphenidate. And when you see people with serious ADHD and see how much the drugs help them, it's a lot. And so I think Weaver is a fair judge of the drugs here. Maybe it helps you, but this is his story. And so these were the signs for him that you should look out for if you feel like whatever drug you are taking is hindering you. Let's get back into it.
I guess that is really what bothered me about it. It wasn't just the money I was spending. I was spending a lot of money on it, but I just felt like maybe I could be better without it. And it was really hard for me to quit. Like, it was actually harder for me to quit than anything else I've ever done. Like, I've been around the block. I've done various drugs. I've experimented, they say that's what college is for. I've experimented with things, but for me, weed was the hardest thing to quit. And I think it's just because I was doing it for so long, 10 to 15 years or so.
It's a long time.
I don't believe weed is inherently addictive, but it can be something that you just like doing. And for some people, they like doing it too much. I'm going to quickly talk about how.
So yeah, I need to pause right here because this idea of inherently addictive is nonsense to me. There are addictive drugs, and those drugs then are all inherently addictive. But this goes back to the lean video where I was discussing what drugs do you like? Obviously, Weaver, I keep pausing on some awkward ass, faces of his. My apologies, Weaver. But what drugs do you like? Weaver obviously likes smoking weed a lot. So that's what he did. And that's what his substance use disorder became, was a cannabis use disorder, because that's the drug he liked. Whatever drugs he tried, I have no idea. I'm not going to speculate either because he didn't mention them, but he obviously didn't like those drugs enough to develop a substance use disorder, right? Like, cannabis was his drug of choice. And that's what he liked. Now, there are people with poly drug addictions, and that's not what we're talking about necessarily. I mean, people who use drugs like multiple drugs. That doesn't mean that they're susceptible to being addicted to all the drugs. But yeah, let's get back into it.
How I quit, because this may be helpful for some people, obviously.
First
thing I did was I replaced weed with other things I enjoyed. Skateboarding, playing video games, eating ice cream, drinking coffee. I started drinking a lot more coffee, which is why my teeth are they're getting a little yellow. I need to do some whitening strips or something. That's not the point. But anytime I got a craving to smoke weed, I would probably play video games. I would just do it until it went away. And that's not enough, though, in my opinion. This helps a lot, and it'll help you get through those urges. This works for any sort of drug, in my opinion. It's a lot harder with harder drugs, obviously.
Commercial, and this is a good place to pause because harder drugs, I don't believe in harder drugs. In my opinion, if you do drugs, you do drugs. There's no such thing as hard drugs and soft drugs. Alcohol, in this case, would be a hard drug. It's just as addictive as cocaine, heroin, methamphetamine, whatever you want to say. I was an alcohol researcher. Trust me, I know. So from that perspective, the techniques you use to quit weed are going to work with any substance that you are going to need to quit. However, cannabis, as we know, doesn't cause a lot of physical symptoms along with withdrawal. So in the case of alcohol, you can die from alcohol withdrawal. It is one of the only drugs that you can die from withdrawal in, being alcohol and benzodiazepines. I think it's a little up in the air as to whether or not you can die from opioid withdrawal, but you can absolutely die from alcohol and benzodiazepine withdrawal. And so I think it is vastly underestimated how dangerous alcohol and benzos are because of that withdrawal. And we common think of like hard drugs as like meth, crack, and heroin, but like, hate to tell you guys, that's not how it works. Hard drugs aren't real. Soft drugs aren't real. There's just drugs, and you can choose to use particular ones. I'm going to have to cut this stupid commercial out.
But what it really comes down to, in my opinion, is how badly you want it. Like, I really believe that this was the thing holding me back, and I had enough of it at this point. So I was very committed to it. You need to trust that it is the right choice for you, and you're making the right choice in the long run, and you got to believe that it's going to get better down the road, and it will. I actually wrote a note to myself on a sobriety app I use. I'm not going to say the name of it because I'm not here to advertise them. This would be a great time for an ad placement though, but no, fuck you. This is the genuine story. I felt like I would actually sully the video a bit because people would be wondering is it real anymore, you know? So I started a timer on here, obviously, but I wrote a note to myself on here, and I think that is what helps solidify this the most for me. Now, you don't need an app to do this. You could just write on a piece of paper, but you got to make sure it's really genuine and you really mean it. Here's what I wrote exactly. I wrote, I am a much smarter person while sober. I definitely could have worded that better. I definitely think I've gotten more intelligent since I quit because I would have worded that differently. My personality is more flavorful without it. I think I'm wasting my money on this to cope with the lack of success in my life. The kicker is this is the thing holding me back from success in my life. And I do believe that was true. That note meant a lot to me. I didn't look at it when I was feeling like smoking weed. If anything, I didn't really get too many, I didn't really think about smoking weed too much because I really believed that this was the thing holding me back. And I do think it was. So I also wrote down how much money I spent per day on it, which I roughly estimated being about $20 a day. Over the past 2 years, I would have spent $11,000 on weed if I continued to do it the way I was, which I believe was the most efficient way for me to smoke how often I was. I guess my point here is you need things to fall back on. It's good having people believe in you too. I think that also helped me a lot too. I kind of shared my sobriety story a bit. Maybe sobriety isn't the right word because I've drank, I've done other things here and there, but sobriety as in from weed, because that was the thing that was fucking me up the most.
Yeah, so I think that's a good place to stop. Shout out to Weaver Pete's. Good job quitting the thing that you felt like was holding you back. We double applaud that for sure. When it comes to this idea of sobriety, I think it's important for Weaver to be able to say that he's now sober. If he feels like that, cannabis was the thing that was holding him back and he doesn't use cannabis anymore, just because he drinks and does caffeine doesn't mean that he's not sober from the thing that was his problem. But I think it's a more nuanced acknowledgement that he's getting out of, like, hey, I'm not sober in the sense of I don't drink or I don't use caffeine, or, you know, maybe he uses nicotine. I don't know. You know, that's not the point. The point is that he is sober from the drug that he was struggling with and that he felt like was holding him back. And so I also think it's important to note that someone is not going to be able to really get out of that cycle of addiction or a substance use disorder until they have decided it is best for them. There's no amount of, you know, forcing that person to change that is going to, you know, force them to change. Addiction is a very difficult cycle to break. And so if that person doesn't make the decision to change, they're not going to, and they're just going to continue the cycle. I think cannabis in particular, because our society has become more accepting of it, it doesn't hold the consequences of some other drugs, and the high necessarily doesn't lead to the consequences of those other drugs. And so, you know, it's important to think about that from a perspective. Got a fucking gnat flying around this house. Anyway, appreciate you guys tuning in today. Shout out to Weaver Beats. We applaud the man for getting sober from cannabis, even though he still drinks and uses other drugs responsibly. For that, you know what I'm saying? Responsible drug use is what we are going for on this channel. We just don't want to judge people for their drug use, because hard drugs don't exist. There are just drugs. And so we know that hard drugs don't exist. If the legal drug, alcohol, is one of the only drugs you can die from withdrawal from, and cigarette smoking is guaranteed to kill you if you are a chronic cigarette smoker, but that is legal. So yeah, sorry, hard drugs don't exist. That's one of the things we're also trying to get across on this channel. So hit the like if you like this video. Subscribe to the channel. Get in the comments. If you have a video for me to react to, I'll give you a shout out. I appreciate all of you beautiful people. Thanks for turning on.
Tune in. And drop out, drop out, drop out.
See you in the next video. Peace out, y'all.